Once again, welcome to our webinar. The official title is Mastering the Mayhem, Trends and Tools for Network Management in 2024. My name is Leon Adato. I have some amazing guests with me today, and we are going to opine on all things networking, monitoring, observability, and so on. In fact, let's go ahead and do some introductions before I even get to any kind of notes about how this webinar is going to go. So I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves with their name, their official title at Kentik, their unofficial title if they have one, and then one quick sentence about your unique technical point of view as far as the tools and trends for network monitoring and observability. I also want to point out that we have a number of us who are calling from different places that are not our home. Some things as far away as Buenos Aires, and also in exotic locations like Seattle. So if people's internet connection is weird, we can measure that. That's what we're here for. We're Kentik. So again, my name is Leon Adato. I'm one of the technical evangelists here at Kentik. And my technical point of view is that monitoring should not be a act of interpretive dance. We've been doing this for too long for it to be, completely unique to your business. We know how to do this. So let's, get with some standards. That's me. I'm going to pick on Chris O'Brien next. Chris, who are you? How are you? What are you?
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a senior director of product management here at Kentik. I spent about a decade as a network engineer, and then I've been working to build tools for network engineers for more than a decade now. So I think a lot about like what problems are there to solve and how best to solve them, and work with development teams to make that happen. So that's me.
Okay, awesome. Next up, Rosalind Whitley. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. And I'm a former systems engineer. Now I am a product marketer for infrastructure engineering products. I've been doing that for years, kind of along the tool chain. So my perspective is really trained on how and specializing in enterprise. So trained on how enterprises are trying to get software into into the hands of their customers, into the customer experience, and all the aches and pains along the way, and how B2B software can help.
Wonderful. Okay, next up, Doug Madori. Hello.
Hi, Liam. So I'm Doug Madori. I'm the director of internet analysis, and my role here is to use the data that we have and our internet measurement capabilities to tell stories about things that are happening on the internet that are relevant to our customer base and the internet community.
Fantastic. It is great to be on with you as well. And finally, last but certainly not least, Charlcye Mitchell. Hi there.
Hi, thanks. I'm a technical marketing engineer here at Kentik, and I am very passionate about building AI solutions that efficiently solve problems for our users.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it is always fun to be on, talking with you. The group of us actually get to talk with each other a lot during the day working at Kentik. So this is just part of our natural flow of conversation. We don't always get together as this group, but we do have lots of conversations back and forth. Diving into the conversation, network monitoring and observability are terms that are actually on the decline in terms of their popularity or their use in the industry, but the numbers are telling a different story in the sense that they're used more, they're needed more, but the things that we call them and the things that we use to refer to those techniques may be changing. Now, the numbers that I'm talking about, and a lot of our conversation today is based on the results that have been published recently in the EMA Megatrends Guide. What we're finding there is that tools are being built and invested in by the industry and by people at large, but they're not giving it the marketing attention that it has gotten maybe in years or even decades past. So what we want to do today is answer the question of what do people need to know about what's happening in terms of monitoring and observability, and what they can and even should do about it. And by the way, we will have a link to the Megatrends Guide, Network Management Megatrends, in the show notes and everything. And that takes me to actually some housekeeping. The agenda is right there. I'm not going to talk about it because we're actually going to do it. But as far as housekeeping goes, this session is being recorded, and a link to this recording will be shared later in case you want to share it with your friends and relatives and maybe even coworkers. There will be time for Q&A afterward. However, there's a Q&A box, so feel free to ask your questions, and we'll try to field them as we go if we have time. So please keep those questions coming, and we will either answer them as we go or at the end. With that being said, I want to start off with a day in the life. Before we get into specific tools or techniques or technologies, I want to discuss what this Megatrends Guide discovered in the context of the circumstances, the daily boots on the ground experiences that people are having with their work as they answered the survey about monitoring and observability. So we're going to dive right into that. Starting off with a statistic that two statistics I actually like. 40% of a network operator's and larger IT professionals' day is spent troubleshooting. It doesn't matter whether you're an architect or a frontline help desk person, at least 40% of your day is spent troubleshooting. Charlcye, I know that you come from a similar background to me, doing a lot of, on call and things like that. So what's your first thought about that?
I mean, I enjoy troubleshooting. It's part of the job. It's fun. You're solving problems. And it's really fun when you actually have the information and the subject matter expertise and the tooling that you need to find the solution to the problem and solve it. When that's not the case, it's a very different experience.
Right. And when we talk about, seeing the differences, it's having data in front of you. Like, I'm okay with 40% of my day being troubleshooting if, in fact, I am working through the problem. But if that 40% is figuring out what the heck happened in the first place, I don't even know where to start. That is very frustrating 40%. So, in terms of the information that people could have and, in fact, should have, I think that this screen is a little bit illustrative. I don't know. Chris, Roz, do you have any thoughts about what's on the screen here?
And like typically people will troubleshoot a situation, they'll get like notified by a monitoring system. That monitoring system also has other information about, devices close to that, interfaces, statistics, hardware. Like there's a variety of information that the monitoring system has. You also have a CLI where you log in, or a GUI where you log into the administratively log into the device, and there you can get extra information that's not available for monitoring. You can implement changes and observe the results and so forth. We are playing with a new sort of way to interact here, which we're calling journeys, which is essentially, using natural language. You can ask a question, and then the core idea of journey is almost anytime you're doing analytics or troubleshooting, you're asking a broad question, you're looking at the data that is the response to that question, and then asking subsequent questions, whether that's a drill in or it's like, okay, that's what that means over here. What about over here? And so how can we facilitate, knowing that that's so commonly our workflow, how can we facilitate that iterative asking of questions and seeing responses, and having all that history if you need to go back and it's like, oh, that one data point, let me now compare those. And journeys is how we're starting to play with doing that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about the history is, like, let's say you have, because I don't know, when I had a pager, sometimes I might have solved the same problems more than once, right? Hopefully that doesn't make me look too bad, but sometimes stuff would come up again and it'd be like, oh, that again. So it's really nice to have this kind of record of that iterative journey, and kind of where you found the evidence that was that pointed you to the root cause so you could understand it. Because not only is that good for those of us who may repeat our mistakes, but it's also good for other folks who join the team, sort of getting out of the space where all the context is stored in a few siloed brains, right?
It's a really good point, because I think in the past we have hoped that knowledge store would be in a knowledge base that was usually associated with a ticket queue or a ticket system. And my experience, just speaking for myself, it wasn't in the right place. Having a problem and having tools that would show me where the problem was happening, and then having to go to a completely separate system to find out, has anyone had this problem before, and have they used the same words I did? about it was suboptimal.
Yeah,
And
that's one of those
go ahead.
fantastic ideas that never works,
It, it was, yeah, I mean, it made sense in our heads when we said it, but having it in the tool that is showing me the problem and saying, look, I have seen this problem before. I've seen this pattern before, and here are some of the questions or comments that have come up before is incredibly helpful. More helpful than, again, having a knowledge base associated with a ticket queue, et cetera, et cetera. The other point I wanted to bring up, Chris, to your point about admin interfaces, is that sometimes the question that I get asked in the booth or whatever is, yeah, monitoring and observability tools, but I can just do it myself. I know all the commands. And that's great, but it doesn't scale. If you have, 5 devices, okay, maybe. But if you have 50 or 500 devices, you can't run all the commands on all the interfaces to be able to correlate the information across the entire scope. And to forget about, today with the cloud. I mean, yes, that's a thing, but even on-prem, that was an overwhelming experience. And so having a tool that takes that information and aggregates it together so you can see it as a slice is not just helpful, it's necessary, at least in my opinion. I don't know if anybody has other thoughts about it.
We want the next stat, I think.
Okay.
I think
All right,
we're
fine.
waiting for the next
Fine.
stat.
I'm going to go off on this one. This one has my rant written all over it. So I'm just going to dive in. Only 29% of the network monitoring alerts are actionable because alerts don't suck. Your alerts suck, as I am always fond of telling people. It is just deeply frustrating to me that such a low level. And part of that is because there's an immature attitude or experience with alerting that it goes to email and it just tells me, system is down. Like literally, that's the message you get. And, that's not actionable by anybody. But having the alert associated um, with having the alert associated with the system that was generating it and being able to walk it back. So I can say, okay, system is down. That doesn't help me, but click. Now I can see which system. I can see when. I can see whatever, at least is a start. However, I have an entire talk that I give that I will not give now as far as if this is you, if you are feeling like, you're part of that 29% of my alerts are useful and the rest of them aren't, then we need to talk. That's where I'm going to leave it. All right, moving on, because remember that we're just talking about the experience, the day-to-day experience. Another experience.
Can I make a
Go
comment
ahead.
on that last one, Leon?
Sure.
Yeah, everyone knows that alerts are a real pain point, and so unfortunately, there's a lot of hype in the market about alerts, and a lot of folks trying to sell you alerts that are 100% actionable. I've been working in the industry and in network engineering for like 20 years now. I have not seen an environment where that worked well. You can't buy that from a vendor. You have to have both the tool side and a lot of wisdom and expertise and discipline on your team side in how you implement and constantly improve that. That's the only way I've seen it work. That's not the answer I want to be true, but that seems to be the answer that is true. So similar to you, Leon, I'm been very fortunate to see like hundreds of network monitoring, network observability environments. And if this is something that our audience has challenges with, contact us. Like we will help you on both sides of that equation.
Yes. And the only other point that I want to make, because you opened up the can of worms, is that when you buy a monitoring tool and they have the rules built in, those are not necessarily best practices. A lot of times, those are examples of things you could do. So nobody wants you to alert when CPU is at 70%. All right. But the alert is there to show you that when CPU exceeds a particular threshold, you can also grab the top 10 processes sorted by memory usage or by CPU usage or whatever. They want to show an example of that. So please, remember that do not turn all the alerts on in the tool that you have. That is not going to help you. A lot of times they are there for just examples, like I said. Okay, moving on. Network teams say over 50% of network-related problems would be preventable with better network management tools. This has our name all over it. So who wants to sound off on that? Because I've talked too much already. Roz?
I'll chat.
Okay, fine.
I saw Roz hesitating. Yeah, so I'll chat. Yeah, it's a little depressing. The reason this is depressing is not because it exists, but because it existed this way 10 years ago too. So like what progress have we made? I think I think the fact that it still continues to be this way points to the reality that it's hard. First of all, it's a complex task to put together a set of tools that will ideally support you in how you do network management and prevent problems. But I think the fundamental challenge is after you fix something, getting your tools to fix the next thing is no longer the priority. Setting up new architecture is the priority. Deploying a new service for your users or a new network location or fixing a different fire. And that challenge of like being prepared for the next fire so that you can efficiently and quickly solve it or so that it does not happen versus just dealing with the day to day is, fundamental of how to become an expert in IT. There was, it must have been 10 years or so ago, they came out with this book, The Phoenix Project, kind of taking some ideas from DevOps and writing it story-like so it was easier for us all to consume. Man, did that really hit the nail on the head for a lot of our experiences, but it also started to lay out, a way out of that. And might be worth looking into the Phoenix Project. Really great book to help you sort of shift gears, change mindset, and figure out how to really get ahead of these long-term problems like this so you can change this number.
Yeah, and when I talk about that book, there's the group usually divides itself into I hate Brent or I was Brent. Like those are the two people. And for those people who haven't read the book yet, read the book and you'll know why I'm talking about Brent and who the heck is Brent. But
Well,
yeah, it
yeah, I
was
think that actually brings up a point that, like, when I look at this, I'm also thinking about collaboration, right? Because when we say network related problems, who usually surfaces those first? It's usually not the network team. So I think how teams work
Mhm.
together, that's always been important. I think that's only more so now with the types of infrastructure that we are running now and just the just sheer surface area of it all. So like application teams, internal customers, like even other teams on the infra side, like your database team, your platform team, your SRE team, they may all be involved in these projects and these incidents that we're working through, that have network components where you need to understand things on the network level. So I think how tools deal with collab is also really important. And it can be a factor in how well you're able to like be preventative, be proactive versus firefighting, which is the dream, right? So,
yeah. It it's there's no simple answers. If there were, we wouldn't be as employed as, easily employed as we are. Yeah, it's all there. And again, I'm going to keep on moving forward because we're really just talking about people's experiences. This is definitely one of the primary ones. If we had better tools, we could do a better job. Sure. But when you're talking about tools, like tools of what, tools where, because 50%, 56% of the companies that were surveyed in this report have multi-cloud environments, not just hybrid cloud, meaning on-prem and cloud, but multiple clouds and multiples of clouds. Like there's multiple things in GCP and also multiple things in AWS and so on and so forth. I'm Roz, I know you've done a lot of research on this side. Can you elaborate on this for a little bit?
yeah, definitely. There's a ton of reporting on this, analyst reports, industry reports, open source foundation reports that take stabs and do surveys and do estimates around this. So kind of some of the numbers jangling around in my head that aren't in this report are like up to 94% of companies worldwide are leveraging the public cloud in some way. About, you mentioned hybrid cloud, that's about 50% solid. You see that one across the board. About 50% of companies are using hybrid cloud. So they're in the data center and they're also in the cloud. But when you look at folks who are leveraging public cloud, at least 75% of them are using two or more cloud providers. So I think that this stat that we've gathered in this most recent survey really tracks. Let's see, like what comes to mind for me here. Well, I've had an infrastructure engineering software career, and in that time, it's been a decade, and more I've seen that enterprises that like I think enterprises have been operationalizing the cloud in that time, and many of them are pretty far along. So they're at the point where they're confident and they have the cloud operationalized, and they probably are using a variety of different clouds. So now what they're looking for in their tools and platforms, whether we're talking about observability solutions, managed cloud services on the more development side, or CI/CD pipeline automation stuff, those are all areas where I've worked. Folks are really looking to optimize costs. So they want to optimize how much their software costs, as well as, of course, other parts of the triangle. So how well does it perform? And also how nimbly are they able to get those customer experiences into the market to their customers? And when you add up those goals and you're kind of looking at the different constraints there, and you bring in other things that enterprises have to worry about, like compliance, security. There's a lot of data processing that's come in the picture in the last 5 years with all these kind of ML and AI workloads that companies are bringing on. Plus, you have your basics like backup and failover, which is still important. Reliability is still important. So we've got all of those requirements, plus we have those goals. We really want to do it really well, cheaply, and fast, right? And we don't want to give anything up. So that's a little different. Like the balance of that is a little bit different in every company, different in every vertical. But we end up with a landscape where even when a company is primarily invested in one public cloud platform, like they're all in and they're overwhelmingly have all their infrastructure there, they will have other environments. So they're going to be looking at how can we reduce operating costs in this secondary environment, or how can we use this secondary environment to reduce operating costs where it really matters, to help us kind of dial in that performance, the customer experience, get that where we want, get the capacity that we need for our critical services for the lowest possible cost. So it's just all about like avoiding the trade-offs, I think. I think that's what multi-cloud is really about. Yeah.
Anyone want to chime in on anything? I'm just going to pull up this slide that shows what a typical multi-cloud environment might look like. Anybody have any other notes that they want to add to that?
I mean, we've been, what you see on the screen is we've been working to bring some level of visibility to not only just like visibility over the cloud, but how do these things work together? And there's a different set of data and access you have with your on-prem equipment versus clouds versus, for example, internet that you're using. We service a lot of either service providers or very large organizations, and for them, they must be very hands-on and methodical in how they manage their internet. So we wanted to put all of those things on the same screen so you could get an overview in a way to drill in and understand the whole of the thing. And we've been experimenting with that for a while. We'll continue. I think there's still a ways to go.
Yeah. I also want to point out that, Kentik's DNA has been largely connected to the provider space, but there are a lot of enterprises that look like providers that have the same level of needs. So this is not a enterprise-only tool set or an enterprise-only problem. There are plenty of organizations, small, medium, and large, that struggle with the exact same issues, maybe at a different scale, maybe not, honestly. So it's worth noting. Yeah, Roz.
And either way, it just all emits a lot of telemetry. So what we are really trained on at Kentik is collect all that, enrich it, doing that in real time, and putting it all together to give people a bird's eye view across all of these environments. So maybe there's a primary cloud, they got another public cloud, a network of physical sites, and that's the network, if we talk about it in the broadest strokes. But we've got all the telemetry that's underneath that bird's eye view. And we want to, like, the bird's eye view is only useful if you can also drill into it and get more and more detail. So we're trying to let practitioners query it, visualize it, alert on it, and understand that data coming out of all of those locales kind of in the place that has that bird's eye view. Because we see more and more folks. I guess this is back to what I was talking about in the stat slide, that 56% of folks are using multi-cloud. We've got a lot of enterprises lately that are using Oracle Cloud to reduce costs for specific workloads. Or, maybe there's that team from an acquisition that uses GCP. Those apps are making money, so they need to be maintained, they need to be integrated. And that's where something like this really comes in handy. When you end up in that situation. And I think that's also like, I think about this as the myth of multi-cloud. I think we have this idea that multi-cloud is like a choice. It's like a strategy. I think it's often not so strategic. It's like a situation that you end up in. And that's one of the complexities that we're trying to help folks like cope with and manage confidently.
Yeah, like almost everything in IT and in tech, heterogeneous is the natural state. Homogeneous, meaning I only have one cloud, I only have one monitoring tool, I only have one whatever. Like that is not a thing. That is not a thing that ever happens. You're always going to be dealing with multi, and the question is, how do you make them integrate together, play well together? All right, so that elaborates on the boots on the ground experience, what people are dealing with. So now we're going to move to phase two, basically, which is what are the things that we can use to improve that experience. And all right, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off because in every webinar today, I think it's a US statute that you have to talk about AI. So here we go. We're going to talk about AI. What does everyone think about, sprinkling AI on everything like it's some kind of technological fairy dust? So there's a reality here. In the survey, 96% of the respondents are either using or are interested in using AI ML based features. I am an AI skeptic, not that I don't think it's a thing or that it's useful. I'm just exhausted by hearing about it, integrating everything. However, I am looking forward to you folks talking to me about what the reality of the AI stuff is. And I'm going to pick on someone who hasn't said a whole lot. Charlcye, you
I
said
have
you
strong
were
feelings
here
about
for
AI. Yeah, I'm here for the AI.
All right.
Yeah, so I think in general, like, let's see, can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Kentik has, actually, there's one more slide there.
Oh,
Kentik has
okay.
a natural language query editor. So you can just ask questions in natural language, which is actually, we find our query, as Roz mentioned, we have an exciting amount of telemetry that we collect and enrich here. And our query editor is pretty great. But you can imagine if you have hundreds of options of things that you can query, natural language queries turn out to just be faster for even our experienced practitioners and people who know the tooling and the network really well, and just much easier for new team members. So we've added natural language queries, and then we've also added, as we talked about earlier, AI journeys so that you can do your troubleshooting in the platform and save that journey so that you can come back to it later, or maybe your more junior team members or people who are new to that situation can access it and see how we've resolved it in the past. And I'm happy to
I must
show
see
you
it.
how.
I must see it. Here, I've stopped sharing. Go for it.
Okay, let's see. Um, yeah, so here, this is our journeys platform. You can ask it all kinds of things. If you wanted to just like see, we've got something going on with bricks, let's check out the traffic. Show me traffic source by city from bricks countries. It might be kind of a complicated query to have to manually create in the query editor, but it works just kind of easily with natural language.
Right.
So
And while this is loading, I want to point out that as tech practitioners, we are good at a lot of things, but we're not good at everything. And what natural language interfaces do is it lets you ask questions about things that you are not as technologically apt about. I'm really comfortable in SNMP. I'm really comfortable with APIs. NetFlow, not so much. But if you give me a way to ask about NetFlow information where I don't have to actually know the commands, it's helpful. Sorry, I cut you off, Charlcye. Keep going.
Oh, I was just like, you don't even need to know what the BRICS countries are. You just type it in there. It'll give you a map of where that traffic is, what city it's coming from. And if you wanted to like enrich it with application data, you could just say now add application um, and show me on a line chart, and it'll do that for you. Why can I not type? Because I'm on camera.
Because we're all watching. Because yeah,
exactly.
No pressure. We're just watching you type everything.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just it's fun, it's easy to use, and then you can save that journey, give it a name over here, BRICS traffic, and then it'll be there for you.
Which goes back to what Chris and I were talking about at the beginning, which is having the experiential information right there with the information about what's going wrong is incredibly helpful. All right, I have to share my screen again. Give me a second. Let's see if I do share the right one. There we go. Okay, so there's AI. AI's out of the way. AI is a thing. We're all excited. Woohoo! Moving on, because I'm tired of AI. 94% of organizations are using or are interested in using network monitoring tools that generate synthetic network traffic. And just like Charlcye and I have feelings about AI, Doug, I know you have a feeling or two about synthetic network traffic. Do you want to sound off or ease into it?
You bet. I was just going to say, 94%, this is basically everybody. And we're talking about generating synthetic traffic. We're talking about pings, trace routes. This is like the standard tool of any network engineer doing diagnostics. At Kentik, our synthetics platform also includes things like page load tests. And in the other direction, we also have BGP monitoring, which isn't necessarily generating synthetics traffic, but it's another networking monitoring tool. So we group those together. And to illustrate this, I thought, as a internet measurement analyst, I thought I would just tell a story of using some of this stuff in my practice. And so the story I chose to share was about the activation of the submarine cable to St. Helena. Covering submarine cables has been a theme of the work that I've done for the last 15 years, either cable activations or cable cuts. And this latest one is an example of an activation. St. Helena, if you don't know, is a remote island in the South Atlantic. If you've ever heard of it, it might be because it was the final point of exile of Napoleon. But it also is a territory of the UK, has a small population that has been completely reliant on geostationary satellite service, which is not great. And it's been a long issue for the society on that island. It limits their economic viability, it limits their quality of life, and it's been a project that they've been trying to improve service there. And after a very long lobbying effort, they were able to get Google, who was building this Equiano cable down the west coast of Africa, to build a spur to connect the island. And on October 1st, we saw the first evidence of traffic getting passed over the cable. Maybe we'll go to the next slide then.
Okay.
So here we're going to look at this activation in a few different dimensions, but it's I guess the power here that we're trying to demonstrate is that when you're investigating these kind of things, it's helpful to have different types of data to figure out what's going on. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at performance. So along the top, we're just looking at performance to latency from our agent in AWS in London to the one ISP that serves St. Helena, Sure South Atlantic. And initially, we're looking at a latency of 657 milliseconds over geostationary satellite. And you can't do better than about 480 milliseconds just due to the speed of light and where the satellites are for geostationary. And then you can see the little dip just after midnight on October 1st. It reverts back and then finally cuts over submarine cable at 131 milliseconds. And one thing that's also kind of interesting is on the bottom of that slide on the left, you can see that the quality of the connection also has improved. So you see a jitter that's happening in the first half of that graph, and it just completely goes away as the quality improves over submarine cable. There really is just no comparison to the two mediums, which is why they needed this. I don't have a graph here, but we had it from our traffic stats. You could see a 20x growth in the volume of traffic, just due to the capacity added by a submarine cable. So it was a new day on October 1st for the folks here. But finally, I just wanted to show the same thing taking place in the BGP space. And this is my area of expertise. And in the graphic on the right, we're looking at on the bottom, this is a ball and stick AS topology layout of how one of these routes gets announced to the internet. So the prefix is on the bottom right of the diagram, and it goes through these ASs. It's originated by Sure South Atlantic, and this graphic that we're seeing along the top is the transition of going from geostationary satellites to submarines. So just like in the latency, you had that dip just after midnight. You see the colors change from green to purple as all of our BGP sources shift briefly from seeing this connection through satellite over to submarine cable. It reverts back to satellite, and then finally, an hour later, it's finally on submarine cable. Companies may not be connecting remote islands very often like this, but I think the lesson here is this could be a remote office, or this could be another part of your network that perhaps is shifting transit providers from provider A to provider B, and you'd like to keep tabs on the performance implications of changing the transit. There's a lot of use cases here that would relate to everyday networking that don't have to be quite as exotic as getting St. Helena online. But so I think it's no surprise to hear the 94%, basically 100% of everybody is using some kind of trace ping, some kind of synthetic traffic to keep tabs on the network. It's a staple of the topic, the domain.
It definitely is. And to your point, this is I mean, we've labeled it with geosatellite and submarine cable, but this is any cutover experience. Not only knowing that it cut over, but did it cut over successfully? Are we getting the throughput that we expected? Are we having the experience that we expected? Are there any lagging indicators that we need to be aware of? These are all things that, first of all, monitoring and observability are there to answer. But second of all, you can't always rely on your customers stress testing the points you just cut over to. And synthetic testing is going to be there to tell you when things aren't, acting in the way that you expected. But I want to keep forging on because we have a lot to cover, and time is always short. So the next stat up, 93% of organizations are using or interested in using streaming telemetry, a term that we do not hear often enough, for collecting metrics and events. However, only 26% want to remove SNMP entirely. SNMP is not, in fact, dead. So, Chris, Roz, I know you have thoughts about this. What do you think?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work on this. Streaming telemetry has some incredible benefits, but the picture we see here is people want streaming telemetry, but they can't cut off of SNMP. And I think the reality is, 26% want to remove SNMP. How many actually can is like sub 2%, because we all have to deal with the infrastructure that we have. If you jump to the next slide, the more we've been working on this, the more it becomes clear what the benefits of streaming telemetry are. There's a lot of sort of benefits theoretically we need to talk about, but some of the ones that we've observed that are pretty valuable are, first, an increase in detail. So the efficiency you get with streaming telemetry is so high that you can gather metrics much, much more frequently. You see here the typical sort of 5-minute rate of SNMP and the story that tells in the top graph versus more typical with streaming telemetry, something like 5 seconds. You can see a different story. Like you've got a spike in the below graph that is significant. It's like more than 50%, and it's more than one data point, but that doesn't show up at all in the top. And then if you jump to the next slide, streaming telemetry also does, well, the technical reason is it does timestamps at the source. So it's long been a challenge with SNMP to figure out, you know, uh, to make sure that we're getting one data point exactly every 5 minutes. There's like transit and processing time and saving time and all of these things, so that sometimes you get two data points in one window and zero data points in another. And that tends to introduce these false spikes. And so this was from a fantastic presentation, SNMP is Dead, from Nanog73. Totally disagree with the headline. Totally love their content. If you see on the left, you can see them doing this polling with SNMP and then switching to streaming telemetry subscription on the right. And all of a sudden, the data is much more smooth. And that's not because you're missing those spikes. That's because those spikes were not real. So the accuracy with streaming telemetry, thanks to things like source-based timestamping, is also a substantial improvement. And then if you jump one more slide, because this data is so much more frequently gathered, it really opens the door. Like, if you think about it in NMS, the most common polling frequency is every 5 minutes. But if you're doing 5 seconds or 1 second with stream telemetry, which is very realistic because it is subscription based and so much more efficient, you can now, switch from waiting 1 or 2 polling cycles. That you have to do this either way, right? Wait 1 or 2 polling cycles, which means in SNMP, you're waiting 5, 10, 11 minutes for the data to show up in your browser compared to when the device reported it. In streaming telemetry, you see this working in one of our products here. We're gathering that data once per second, and we've built a fast path to your browser. So this data is streaming in, filling the graph. You see that in the bottom right. And then the now number in the top right is less than 5 seconds old and keeps updating without refreshing your browser. And this is where we need to be in 2024. We need that accuracy, detail, and freshness of the data that streaming telemetry can offer. The trick is to unlock that so you don't have to cut over from SNMP, so you can support both. And we've been working a lot on that.
Right. And also, for people who are hearing polling every second and they're thinking that's called a DDoS attack, right? Like, I could not, with older technologies, I could not collect that much data and without risking observer bias, crashing the server simply by asking too many questions. Whereas streaming telemetry, again, to your point, because it's subscription based, the box itself is deciding when it can send it, and slicing it in with its other processing makes it so much more efficient and possible. So yeah, that is the amazing part. And this is the point in the webinar where people are starting to say, well, can I do that? I don't know. Which brings me to the, next part of this conversation, which, if these are features that tech practitioners want but don't always have, what is it that they do have, and what are they using these days, and what does that say about it? And that's how we forge a path forward. So diving straight into this, 70% of companies are using cloud monitoring from cloud providers. So you're using the built-in tools, not necessarily a bad thing, but it opens up the door for some problems. So does anyone have any thoughts about what the pros and cons of using our cloud provider monitoring tools might be? Anyone? No? Okay.
I think we lost Roz.
Oh no!
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where she went.
Okay.
In general, having a bunch of disparate tools to manage a singular network is really not all that fun at all. So
yeah, I think we have observed. I know Roz has done a bunch of research around this, but one of the things I've heard her talk about is how when you're looking at understanding your network in the cloud, teams start using the cloud service provider's native tool set, which makes perfect sense. But since 75% of those folks end up eventually using 2 or more clouds, then we deal with a lot of folks that are using multiple of these CSP tools, which can get really challenging. Like, even the basics misalign, right? So the terms these CSPs use for the same thing are different terms. Not to mention correlation and these sorts of things that you would expect from a heterogeneous infrastructure environment. So, lots to figure out when you're using multiple clouds, and one of them is typically that the cloud service provider tools are not enough by themselves.
Right. And yeah, there's the two main problems is A, the provider isn't covering all the things that the consumer might necessarily want, and B, it doesn't connect. It's the same thing as using vendor supplied management tools as your monitoring solution. So you have vendor A and they can manage their stuff, and you have vendor B and they can manage and provide some monitoring on their stuff, but they don't connect. So you don't know when there's been a handoff. And as we already pointed out, multi-cloud means that your stuff, your actual application, your user experience is happening across multiple platforms, and you need a single unified view for all of those things. And you're not going to get that from a single cloud provider. I think that's what this is saying. And, to the point here, you need to understand your connection points, your gateways, as data passes back and through from one cloud provider, because that's where the cost is. Cost, to a lot of people's surprise, your cost is not in purchasing or maintaining the environment, it's your ingress and egress cost. And as anybody who's gotten that surprise $7,000 AWS bill, guilty, not guilty, you don't know about that until the bill comes in. And that's where your monitoring observability can tell you. It knows how much you're paying, and it knows how much data you're moving in the last 5 minutes. How about we just tell you what that cost is, right?
Yeah,
so that's another piece. Yeah, go ahead.
Traffic has also not something I was sort of, it makes sense in hindsight, but surprised me as it happened. Traffic has really come front and center when you want to understand what's going on with your network, and it's a cloud network, because you've lost most of your metrics. The hardware is different, your access level to the hardware is different, but what remains is that you got network traffic transiting that cloud, and that network traffic tells you a whole lot about capacity, performance, load, all of these different things. And so I recently went to Monitorama, which is a fantastic yearly DevOps conference, and one of the really interesting presentations from Netflix was talking about how they do network observability, and in fact cloud observability there across their applications. And they had 5 things up on the screen that were their core technologies, and one of them was flow and traffic analytics. So I think understanding your traffic becomes even more important in a cloud environment where you've lost maybe some of the portholes to see other things in your network.
Exactly. And that speaks to our next statistic. Um, people aren't really happy with the tools that they may be using. 38% say their hybrid or multi-cloud monitoring efforts are very effective. Now, remember that when we went back, I'm all over the place. So 70% are using the cloud monitoring from cloud providers, and yet 38% aren't happy with the tools they have. These two things may be related. I don't know. So we've seen that the tools that they have are not necessarily particularly effective at meeting their needs. So I find, I don't know, does anyone else see that connection, or am I just making it up?
I mean, kudos to that 38%. I feel like I don't talk to people who are cloud with who are happy with their tooling very frequently. So that's an amazing place to be. But it does confirm that the majority of folks are still figuring out how to do their hybrid and multi-cloud monitoring. This is still a work in progress for sure. Um,
Yeah. People are still trying to. Cloud has hit the point of commoditization, but that doesn't mean that it has been completely standardized. Um, And, this is just another visualization of being able to see, a cloud environment and having effective information about what's going on in that network, right? A lot of times we can't visualize where the traffic is going. And I want to point out where the traffic is going and where it's not going. Sometimes it's as important to know, like, not only, holy cow, look at the traffic and look at what it's moving through, but holy cow, look where it's not going. Like, why isn't it going through that gateway, or why isn't it going through that system? What did I do wrong? So the visualizations and the information are often just as important. But I want to keep forging forward. All right. So we've got another stat. Chris, do you want to just speak to this one? I think that you've got the most insight on this.
Yeah, 92% of network operations teams are using three or more tools for the network monitoring and troubleshooting. I'm really happy to hear this because I think it took the industry more than a decade to learn this. The data that you get when you think about there's at least three tools that every network needs to run with any level of performance and be able to sleep at night and be confident that your performance is good. You need an NMS, which is typically where people start. They can tell something is down. And the way I think about an NMS is that is you asking each piece of infrastructure how it thinks that it's doing, right? Tell me about your interfaces. Tell me about your hardware. Tell me about your CPU. Tell me about your this, that, and the other. You also need synthetics. Synthetics is sending test traffic to see how it's actually performing, right? Which is a very different perspective. So typically the synthetics is the better source to understand the performance of your network. But if there were a problem, you would go and look into the NMS because it would have all the fine grained detail about what that device what might be going wrong there. And then certainly the whole point of a network is to send traffic. So being able to see what traffic is transiting your network, I think is the third pillar to the stool, or the first or the second, depending on your environment. But I think you need those three at a minimum, and then you supplement with other tools. It's like you really do need to be carrying around a tool belt because the strengths and weaknesses of these tools are completely different. And if you're able to ask all your infrastructure how it's doing, but you're, for example, not seeing what the performance is across that infrastructure with synthetics, or you don't know what traffic is going across it, it is very hard to run a network really well and be confident and like sleep well at night. And you get a ticket in and someone says the network is slow today. I don't want to go to my NMS for that. I don't want to go to my traffic for that. I want to go to something that says, okay, we have 6 agents in 6 different offices attempting to access 12 applications. All of those are roughly the same latency loss and jitter as they were yesterday. So now when I receive that ticket, I'm high confidence that I need to troubleshoot issues with that specific customer. I'm not troubleshooting an infrastructure issue, or the opposite of that, right?
Right.
So it's super important to me as a former network operator to have that sort of varied visibility and different tools on my tool belt.
Right. And back to my point I made earlier is that heterogeneous is the natural state of IT operations. All right. And just again, a visualization of, what that might look like. This happens to, this is both, a hybrid image, right? We've got multiple cloud providers, multiple on-premises, and I need to be able to see what normal is and if anything is exceeding those normal experiences. Moving forward here, 74% of organizations say they are likely to replace their network monitoring tool over the next 2 years. This is where I look meaningfully and seductively into the camera and I say, call me, right? If you're looking it doesn't have the same effect as maybe some other people doing the same move. Anyway, what do we have to say about this? If 74%, right? Three quarters of the organization surveyed are looking to replace their tool besides, hey, hit me up. What else might we say about this? Anybody want to jump in?
Roz had a power outage. She's just back. Maybe Roz, I'll pass you the microphone.
Well, I had a power outage and I have to ask, well, maybe I can ask later. Did you show them how we could see the packets drop with no route to host on that transit gateway? Because if not, man, you really missed out.
We should let Roz go back and talk about
No. I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think we should we might want to turn along because I don't know what you said in my stead, right? So
we couldn't have said it as well as you did, but we tried to do you proud. You'll get to see it on the replay because this is being recorded. All right, let's keep on moving forward.
Okay, yeah. So sorry, that stat that you were talking about in terms of organizations saying that they're likely to replace their network management tool over the next 2 years. I know, Chris, you found this to be abundantly true in your career, and it really seems like a hype cycle. But I think there's a little bit more to this than the stat. Because what we find is the majority of companies that we talk to want to replace their network management tool imminently. And it's also a pretty big job. to replace it in a complex network because it's wired into everything. And so I guess just that's to say, if you have the same feeling where you want to or you plan to replace your network management system in the next few years, like we feel your pain. And also, we understand that it's no easy undertaking, and it's really important to try to capture those benefits. You know, you wanna leverage streaming telemetry, but you also need to support the rest of your gear. So anyway, I think this stat makes a lot of sense based on what we've seen in the field, but it's also maybe more complicated than what you can boil down with this stat. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And the next stat actually highlights that road forward, right? 65% of the respondents that we talk to say that they would prefer a SaaS option for network management tools. And I want to point out, this used to be an oxymoron, right? I want to monitor my network and I want a cloud-based, a SaaS-based tool to do it. Like, wait a minute, how do you make that work? But of course, we're in a different period of time, but that doesn't mean that the people who are responding are cloud native organizations. We've already emphasized the fact that over 50% of folks out there have hybrid on-prem and cloud and multiple cloud. So they're still saying, but I still want it to be SaaS. It is possible today. It's 2024. Can we do that? Anything anyone else wants to add to that thought?
Yeah, like network management tools, I would say, are slower. Like they're the laggards in switching to SaaS. And it makes perfect sense because you need something local to send that traffic. Typically, the internet does not have access to your internal network, one would hope, to monitor if everything's up and performing and so forth. So you have to install something local to get that visibility, which kind of reduces the like pure cloud play benefits that you would get otherwise in something like Salesforce or what have you, where you don't need anything local. So I think the industry has been slower to implement this because there's less benefits for customers. But the stat suggests is now the majority who want SaaS, and we talked to a bunch of folks recently about this in some primary research, Roz and I, and what we heard was this really, to me, a phrase that really resonated, which is like, I want to get out of the business of deploying and maintaining monitoring systems. That's not their core competency as an infrastructure team. They want to run the infrastructure, improve its performance, deploy new infrastructure. They don't want a new piece of, at least app infrastructure, which is the monitoring systems and their servers and all of this stuff that they need to add to that so that they can monitor the rest of it. They want to get out of that business. So I think we're getting better and better at mixing those things together.
Yeah, I think that's been true. That kind of trade-off not making sense anymore has been true across the tool chain for a pretty long time. But some folks just didn't really trust SaaS for tools like this. And that has taken time. But I think we're kind of past the tipping point now. There's a lot of benefits to focusing on a team's core competency versus and I think those really outweigh the perceived risks at this point. So
yeah,
it's good to see that.
It's a thing that can be done and can be done well and easily. So that pretty much points a way forward, right? In terms of what people want and what's available. I want to point out for those people who are watching that you made it, you survived another webinar. If you would like our famous TCP/IP, but it's the AC/DC logo cap, there's a scan code for you. I'll put it up on the screen here in a minute. But next, I want to just thank everyone for taking time out of their busy day to spend some time listening to us talk about monitoring observability and the trends. You can find more at kentik.com. And I'm going to leave you on that TCP/IP cap slide so that you can take a picture of the QR code with your phone. Thank you all once again. We will answer any questions that have come up through the course of the webinar, but we are at time, so I want to be respectful of that. Thank you to everyone on the panel, and thank everyone who took time to attend today.